What happened? Brexit Secretary David Davis declared that it was time to get down to business this week, as he led his team of officials to Brussels for the first round of substantive talks on Britain's departure from the EU. The negotiations are tackling three main issues: the rights of EU citizens living in the UK, Northern Ireland's borders, and the question of how much money the UK owes the EU. Last week, the UK formally conceded that it did have financial obligations to the bloc, to the relief of Brussels diplomats. They had feared a collapse in the talks after Boris Johnson, the Foreign Secretary, declared that the EU was demanding an extortionate amount and could go whistle. In response, the EU's chief negotiator, Michel Barnier, said, "I'm not hearing any whistling, just the clock ticking." On the eve of the talks, a series of critics warned that the government had unrealistic expectations about Brexit and was hopelessly ill-prepared for the negotiations. Tony Blair also intervened, suggesting that EU leaders might be prepared to meet us halfway on restricting the free movement of people if we opted to drop the Brexit plan and stay in the EU. What the editorials said. "Day after day, the bad news keeps on coming," said The Observer. The National Audit Office predicts a horror show if the UK leaves the EU customs union without a new customs system in place. Data from Eurostat shows Britain at the bottom of the EU growth league, below even Greece. Foreign student applications are down, city jobs are migrating to Paris and Frankfurt. We are starting to get a glimpse of the hard Brexit future. Meanwhile, it is becoming increasingly evident that our leading Brexiteers have no workable plan, no realistic, realizable vision, but are simply making it up as they go along. Slowly but surely, they are being found out. "It's deafening," said The Sun, "the din of Remainers hysterically whipping up fear again to terrify us into bottling out of Brexit. Our chances, while the EU negotiators are all strategic geniuses." Critics never mention the financial disasters of the Eurozone, its mass unemployment, or the bitter and rising resentment of the EU across the continent. As for Blair's claim that the EU is suddenly keen to accommodate our concerns about free movement, said the Daily Telegraph, "That's a joke. EU leaders have made it very clear that such reforms are off the table." What the commentators said. The hope is growing in many quarters that we might, after all, be able to avert the nightmare of leaving the EU, said John Harris in The Guardian. "I know in my heart that Brexit can be stopped," says Blair's former spin doctor, Alistair Campbell. "We'll stop Brexit," insists the philosopher A.C. Grayling. The combination of Labour's election surge and Tory disarray has encouraged the belief that we can somehow pretend the 23rd of June 2016 never happened. The problem is that it did. What's more, it seems that the vast majority of people who voted to leave the EU still feel the same way, so wouldn't take very kindly to a U-turn. "There's no chance of reversing the Article 50 process now," said Daniel Hannan in the Sunday Telegraph. "Consider what would need to happen. 2/3 of MPs would have to vote for an early dissolution of Parliament. Then Remainers would need to win the subsequent election on a pro-EU platform. Then they'd need to win a new referendum. Finally, they'd have to persuade the other 27 EU nations to take us back. And they'd need to do all of this within 20 months. There is little doubt that Britain is going to leave the EU in March 2019, agreed Philip Collins in The Time. Trying to thwart the process risks merely ensuring that we rash out on the least favourable terms. Remainers should redirect their energies into helping the UK reach a deal that does as little damage to our country as possible. But it's too early to give up yet, said Gideon Rachman in the FT. There remains a distinct possibility that there will be revelatory moments in the next 2 years that create an irresistible demand for a second vote. A serious breakdown in negotiations with the risk of a no-deal Brexit would be one such scenario. As they witness the flailing efforts of the May government, the British people may conclude that the Brexiteers have had their chance, and failed. The talks are certainly unlikely to go smoothly, said German MEP Hans-Olaf Henkel in The Times. I fear Barnier and some other EU figures are deliberately trying to make a mess of the situation. as a way of punishing Britain and discouraging others from leaving the Union. What next? Labour has threatened to defeat the repeal bill ending the supremacy of EU law, complaining that it gives ministers sweeping powers to tweak laws without full parliamentary scrutiny. The bill, which was published last week and will be debated in the autumn, will transfer all EU laws onto the British statute book, providing legal continuity and enabling any measures to be subsequently reformed at leisure. A round of Brexit talks will take place each month until October, by which time both sides hope to have finalised the terms of Britain's divorce. If sufficient progress has been made on this front, negotiations will switch to the UK's future trading arrangements with the bloc.